I just want to say, Ken Flo, to you as a guy who speaks Brazilian Portuguese and who I came to Brazil with so many times, and I leaned on you at all these restaurants and everything else. And as I mentioned, you lived here for a while. The nationalism in this country is just really special. And I know you can speak to this. And I'm not saying this is the perfect place, right? We were advised by the UFC to not even leave the hotel, right? Because there are some inherent dangers, a lot of kidnappings and robberies, whatever, right? But the love that these people have for their fellow fighters, right? For the athletes, for one another. I don't know, man. It's just a special, special thing, the way you embrace these people and the way that they embrace each other. And I know if anyone can speak to that, it's probably somebody like you.
There's no question about it, man. They're extremely passionate about their country, their culture, especially when it comes to sporting events. You know, if you've ever been to a soccer event, you've watched it on television or been there live, you will feel that energy. And Brandon Moreno knows a little bit about that. Yeah. They can take it a little bit far, but you know, these are people that absolutely will support their Brazilian fighters to the very end. And it's cool to see, man. It's a special place for sure. Yeah,
you want to talk about blind loyalty and unconditional love. It's these Brazilian fight fans. And certainly Moreno experienced it because, in large part, a lot of people felt like it was an eye poke that caused the swelling. And obviously we all know that it was a punch. But a lot to get into on that front. I did sort of say on the broadcast, and I know Cody tweeted about this, but like, I'm not even trying to be funny. Like, why not chant like they did chant for Shogun, like Shogun, what? But dude, like, how about every now and again chant like Maya Gino instead of like you're gonna die to every fucking fighter? Like, it just gets tired, no? Like,
they definitely tried to intimidate you as you walk in, you know? Actually, I think, was it Jamahal, as he was walking out, there was one fan that was like telling him, like, you're gonna die. He's like doing the throat slit, talking to him throughout, and Jamahal was actually engaging him. I'm like, what are you doing, Jamahal? Focus on the fight. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many examples of, you know, Brazilian fans just going nuts, man. It's hilarious.
Jamal's inner monologue is like, well, Glover might die, but I'm going to be fine. Right. And he almost did. And let us start there. Jamal Sweet Dreams Hill is the new undisputed UFC light heavyweight champion, 50-44 times 3. I hearken back to my first fighter meeting with Jamahal Hill, and we talked about his grappling because his striking obviously is what leads the dance, but I asked him about his grappling and he's like, y'all just don't understand. Like, I fucking trained with Croyler Gracie. I maul people, you know. He was a purple belt at the time. Now he's a brown belt, but a lot of people wondered how he would handle this physical challenge. A lot of different takedown offerings from Glover Teixeira, a lot of attempts, a lot of different takedown attempts, and Jamahal Hill stuffed 2 of 17 shots. I thought he was very good in transition, urgent when he needed to be, and his striking obviously ruled the day. But we have a new UFC light heavyweight champion, and it's an American athlete who I think is only scratching the surface as to how good he can be.
I agree. I think there's so much potential in that young man. I think, you know, he was certainly vulnerable at times, you know, getting mounted against Glover and stuff like that. But again, it's how you deal with it after you're in that position. And he showed that he does know how to escape against a guy who has the credentials and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt of Glover Teixeira. Now, I think he might be in trouble against a guy who is a wrestler, who is solely focused on keeping him on his back. That will be interesting to see. However, against Glover, I thought he was making the right choices. He was staying patient. He was staying composed, which is exactly what you need to do in those big moments during that fight. And, you know, being in hostile territory, being in a major main event, his first World Championship event, and responding in that manner show that this is a guy that's very capable, that's very intelligent. On the feet is really where he was shining, right? But in those tough moments, he showed that he knows how to deal with adversity, and that is going to fuel him and propel him in future fights as well.
He did not have anything that resembled a full training camp for this fight, and I think that's another feather in his cap. You know, he did put down the backwoods about 4 months out, right? But I do think it stands to reason that now he's going to elevate things in terms of his cardiovascular base and all of his other skills. You might have heard us reference sort of energy systems on the broadcast, right? Because there are fighters like Jamahal Hill who maybe don't have the optimal training camp, but they seem to know how to manage energy. And I do believe that the Thiago Santos fight for Jamahal Hill was really good experience for him to have accrued, right? To have that brutal third round in which you're absolutely dominated, you're exhausted back on the stool, and then to have it within yourself to rally and then go finish him in round 4. So, how did you feel just about the way Jamahal managed his energy and the way he mixed his skills both offensively and defensively?
This, to me, is the most important and most ignored aspect of combat, and it's efficiency. How you manage your efficiency, how well you can execute with just a little bit. While everyone's winging huge punches and trying to do this and do that, being an effective martial artist really comes down to efficiency and managing that energy bar, that fixed energy bar that you have for that fight. This was a 5-round fight, a 25-minute battle. And the way that Jamahal can stay composed, talk his heart rate down, and be efficient and effective with his strikes shows a lot. You know, you see a lot of guys start hot first 2-3 minutes or first 2-3 rounds, and they got nothing in rounds 4 and 5. Jamahal needed every single minute of every single round to win that fight against Glover Teixeira, because Glover was rallying somehow at 43 years old, rallying in that round, in that 5th round, to try to get a finish. Just amazed by his heart and the kind of warrior he is. And if Jamahal wasn't efficient, if he wasn't composed, if he didn't know how to manage energy, a less mature fighter, a less skilled fighter. I won't even say that. You could be really skilled, but not be able to do that and lose that fight. Yeah. I think that, to me, is what stands out about Jamahal Hill.
And that's why you're the A side of this podcast, because efficiency was the word that kept eluding me all night. And there you are saving the day. We did episode 1 of this podcast, and we had Yahoo's Kevin Iole, and he comes on. We welcome him on. I don't know if you remember this, in 2015. And he's like, thank you guys for having me. Why is it the Anik and Florian podcast and not the Florian and Anik podcast? Like, with respect, John, Kenny fought for the UFC title 3 times, and the Anik and Florian podcast was, I mean, I don't know.
It's because John does all the fucking work is really what it is.
Well, as you well know, though, the Anik and Florian podcast name
and it was your idea.
Yeah, well, that is true. But the name was actually a placeholder. I remember some early episodes, we were actually soliciting the audience to give us a name for the podcast, and here we are 8 years later, and to whatever degree the Anik and Florian podcast stuck. As far as, and one other note I had on the efficiency, just, hey, jab when tired, right? Like you could tell when he got a little fatigued and he just focused on the jab. In terms of the stoppage, right? So I was in Singapore with John Hackleman after Glover Teixeira fought Yuri Prochazka, and I said to Glover, I was like, immediate rematch, no doubt about it. And Glover's like, every day of the week. Hackleman had some pause, just given, I think, the unpredictably violent nature of Yuri Prochazka and Glover Teixeira engaging in that rematch at 43 years of age. Obviously, that did not materialize, but John Hackleman has gone through some things with Chuck Liddell. He's concerned about his athletes. And so I knew at the end of round 4, because I know Hack so well, that he was going to want to stop this fight. Now, he's not the chief corner. That's for Nelly Feliz Sr. And Hackleman is even deferential to John Nandor, who I believe is the strength and conditioning guy, if I'm not mistaken, right? Maybe he has some other training value as well, right? But so I said that I think if I know John Hackleman the way I do, he's going to try to stop this fight. And then I was able to read his lips, and he said, can we stop this fight? And immediately he was sort of talked back from doing that. Now, I'm not going to sit here and suggest that Mark Goddard or any referee is validated to let the fight continue just because Glover Teixeira gets the mount in round 5. I do believe there were several times in this fight that Jamahal Hill was a strike or 2 away from the finish. Any thoughts from you on that? Did you have a problem with the fight continuing? And what were your thoughts on that corner engagement there after round 4?
This, to me, is the most interesting angle when we're looking at this fight. Jon Hackleman has been around this sport for a very long time, both as a fighter and as a coach. He's seen a lot of things inside the cage, outside the cage, and I don't know him that well. I haven't hung out with him that much, but what I get from Jon is he is as real as it gets, man, and he's not afraid to speak his mind. And when you see the effects on when you see the effects that it's had on past fighters, right? It's heartbreaking as a coach to see that. This was my guy. It was my job to protect him and do my best. And you can only do so much, right? You can't go into the cage with your fighter. But when you see these things take effect on certain people that you absolutely care about, it changes your perspective. And I think he's been with Glover since the very beginning. Glover Teixeira was the main sparring partner for Chuck Liddell for many years when no one knew who Glover Teixeira was. And knowing that and seeing that and knowing what Glover has been through, he doesn't want to see that same thing take effect. He's out there as a coach, yes, but also as a friend. And you have to manage that relationship extremely well and know your fighters to say, if I step in here and I stop this fight, he's going to be okay with me, or love him so much that it doesn't matter. If he's pissed off at me, I'll deal with that later. My job is to protect my dude that I love.
Yeah.
And I think that was the thing that was, tough for him. It's tough because I think at the end of the day, we are adults. We need to take care of ourselves at a certain point. We can only do so much. And to kind of, stop that fire from within that fighter who never wants to quit. It can be tough because Glover had his moments in round 5. He had his moments in round 5. He could have won that fight. He was in the mount. He was landing some good shots on the feet, all that stuff. So do you want to rob a fighter of a victory as well? It's something that I think will vary fight to fight, corner to corner, and not everybody is going to agree on that. The fighter, other coaches, it's a really tricky thing to manage, John.
So when Glover Teixeira says, I'm too tough for my own good, that is concerning to me because he is intellectualizing it and understanding that it's not good for me to be absorbing this damage at 43 years of age. Who's to say he wasn't like half blacked out and doesn't even remember mounting Jamahal Hill, right? Like, yes, I understand that he was able to rally. And so I think for a referee that somehow maybe validates your decision to allow the fight to continue. I certainly think if this was a non-title fight, it would have been stopped. Ray Longo loves texting me on fight night, and he wrote, come on, John, he's taking triple the damage as Lauren Murphy. Now, these are two different situations. And I don't even think there's a point of comparison to Davis and Figueiredo necessarily either, because Figueiredo's eye was effectively shut. He will not be allowed to continue fighting as a one-eyed fighter, right? But Glover Teixeira, Kenny, he passed the vision test, and the blood, despite the aesthetics, the blood didn't seem to be some major factor. So I don't know. I'm sort of talking out of both sides of my mouth a little bit.
No, well, listen, I would say we need to look at a couple things. We definitely need to look at the damage that the fighter is taking, but we also need to look at how the fighter is responding. When we look at Glover, was Glover still? Did he have the sense to return fire? Was he being effective with a lot of the fighting techniques that he was executing inside the octagon? Yes. Now let's go back to, right, because that's a main factor. It's not only the damage, but how is the fighter responding to that damage? Lauren Murphy, to me, was not going to find a way to win this fight. She was taking damage, and her skill level was such, and I mean this respectfully, her skill level was such that she wasn't going to win that fight. She doesn't, unfortunately, possess the footwork, the power, or the speed, or some of the techniques to deal with someone like Andrade. So not only was she taking damage, but she wasn't even able to really respond effectively after round 1, in my opinion, right? Yeah. So to me, it was like one of those things where there's a skill disparity. It's why the matchmaker in fight promotions are so important. I'm not supposed to put up a white belt against a black belt and see what happens in a grappling event. I need to find someone of comparative and equal skill to see what happens. Sometimes it doesn't always work out that way, right?
Yeah.
But when you see that huge disparity of skill and you see that person taking a lot of damage, that's when you have to go, there's no chance. That's it. There's no chance of this guy pulling it off. Glover had a chance. That to me is the difference.
Yeah, no, beautifully put as usual.